finally decided, as I said in 1973, 44 years ago, these 60 million babies, almost 60 million babies that have been ended by the abortion industry, they received a rubber stamp from the courts, from the federal government, not from this Congress and not from the states. The Supreme Court overrules the efforts in the states to protect innocent unborn human life. The Supreme Court overrules this Congress to protect unborn human life, and we have been trying to find ways around that decision ever since 1973. But I've introduced the bill, and it will protect the lives of the voiceless innocents. And then, to make a point now, Mr. Speaker, there's probably some people that are thinking this is a little bit too big of a leap for where we are on the topic today. And I would submit that it's not, that we have been working with what I will call too patiently with incrementalism. When I came to this Congress more than a decade ago, I had been at that time already working to try to help pass legislation that banned partial birth abortions. And the Supreme Court had found the partial birth abortion ban to be unconstitutional based on a couple of things. And one of them was the Supreme Court ruled that it was necessary to save the life of the mother or the health of the mother. And the other one was that Congress hadn't defined the act precisely enough. And so we went to work in the Judiciary Committee, and I want to thank Congressman Steve Chabot of Ohio for taking the lead on this issue. And we held hearing after hearing, and Congress had findings that a partial birth abortion was never medically necessary to save the life of the mother. And that's with much, much testimony of experts before the committee for a long period of time, definitively concluded such. And then the act itself was more precisely defined. Then it went back before the courts, and each of the federal districts that heard the case, 3 of them simultaneously, all of them turned it down as unconstitutional, but it went to the Supreme Court, where the ban on partial birth abortion was upheld. And it has saved some lives, but it's put a small dent in this huge 60 million aborted babies industry. And so we began to go to work on this in other ways. And we have legislation that's introduced before this Congress that bans sex-selected abortions. And we know that there are families now that will use that, I'll say mothers and fathers, that will use the ultrasound to determine the sex of the baby. And if they want a little baby boy and it's a girl, sometimes they will abort that little girl and try again for a boy. We know this is happening in places like China, where they have had up until recently the one-child policy, and the proportion of boys to girls is way out of whack in China because they're aborting little baby girls because they'd prefer having a boy. That happens in America too, but not as statistically evident. But it's immoral to do that. And that piece of legislation has 77% support, and that's the strongest support we have statistically for abortion legislation that exists, as far as I know, in this Congress. Then we have the pain-capable legislation. Little babies that can feel the pain of abortion when that needle with the saline solution is stuck into the. Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to bypass the details of how this functions. Babies can feel pain. They can experience joy. They can experience pleasure. And they experience pain. And we have legislation to prohibit abortion from the time that we can determine that baby feels the pain of being aborted. But that's another definition that's a definition of pain, not a definition of life. And if this is a unique life, as I've described at length here, then this unique life must be protected. We don't say this unique life that has this soul that God puts into this soul from the moment of conception doesn't deserve to be protected unless they can feel pain. What we're saying is it bothers our conscience too much to have a baby killed that can feel the pain and suffering. And so I support these other 2 pieces of legislation that I've described: the sex-selected abortion, the pain-capable, the ban on sex-selected abortion, the ban on pain-capable abortion. But, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't get at the heart of this. the heart of this is this: sacred human life. Human life sacred in all of its forms. It begins at the moment of conception. We need legislation to protect that personhood. And when we can define and clearly detect a heartbeat in a baby from as early as 16 days, we must protect the life of that innocent baby. And so that, Mr. Speaker, is my conviction, my deep conviction, my very profoundly held conviction. But I wondered, what does the rest of the country think? Sometimes I find myself out there right without a majority. Sometimes they will say, well, you didn't have a majority because you weren't right. And this one, I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, human life is sacred in all of its forms. So we asked the question in polling across America, what do the American people think of the proposal to ban abortion once a heartbeat can be detected? And okay, I'm going to go with, okay, Mr. Speaker, the polling that we have out there is very carefully done, and I'm going to give you the numbers first. This is the general number that asks the question: if the heartbeat is detected, the baby is protected. And here's how the polling came together. 69% agree with the position that I've just taken here in the bill that I've introduced, H.R. 490, which is the Heartbeat Protection Act of 2017. The data contained in this polling report are responses to a question that was commissioned by Faith 2 Action, and it's in a Barna Group OmniPoll. 1,002 interviews were conducted of U.S. adults nationwide. And the sampling error for this 1,002 interviews is a plus or minus 3.1%. That's about as accurate as you get with polling. That means there's a 95% confidence level that these numbers are right. And the data is weighted in the national distribution of U.S. adults. They took minimal statistical weighting and they used it to calibrate the samples. And then, so of known population percentages, and it's in relation to the demographic variables of age, gender, I bet it's age, sex, education, and region, so that it's scientifically applied, and it's a poll that was run from January 19th until January 27th. This is pretty fresh information, about as fresh as it gets. And these interviews were conducted. They were conducted over majority landlines, 60% or so off landlines, and 40% off of cell phones or other mobile devices, so that we got a good cross-section of people throughout that. And they were conducted by experienced, trained interviewers, and they were supervised at all times, and they were monitored, and they were computer-assisted telephone interviewing to make sure that the balance of this thing was as good and objective as it could get, Mr. Speaker. And so this polling result says, and it's this: among U.S. adults nationwide, a slight majority, 55%, agrees strongly, that's strongly, that if a doctor is able to detect the heartbeat of an unborn baby, that baby should be legally protected. And that's the core of the question that was asked. And 18% disagree either strongly or somewhat with this. And so when I look at the numbers here, 69% overall are packaged up within the agree strongly component, 55%. Now that's a landslide in a political election, 55%. And this would be a landslide in the polling that says 55% strongly agree that if a doctor can detect a heartbeat, the unborn baby should be protected by law. A 55% landslide majority, Mr. Speaker. And then you add to that the 14% who agree somewhat with this. So from a general agreement standpoint, 69%, or as close as you can get and not exactly hit the number, 7 in 10 Americans say, let's protect those lives of those innocent unborn babies when you can hear their heartbeat. You can hear their heartbeat. The people that disagree strongly are only 10%, and then those who disagree somewhat are another 8%. 18% disagreeing on the other side, but only 10% disagree strongly. So 55% say they strongly support a ban on abortion. Once a heartbeat can be detected, the baby is protected. And only 10% disagree with that strongly. And I'm going to say that they're probably some of the hardcore leftists that I'm engaged with debate with on almost a daily basis here, Mr. Speaker. But you can divide 10% into 55% and say, for everyone out here that says we should not protect that innocent unborn baby whose heart is beating, for everyone who says that, there are 5.5 Americans that say we have to protect, we've got an obligation to, and they believe strongly that we protect the lives of those innocent unborn babies with a heartbeat. That's a huge majority on the side of life, and I'm very gratified to know that that's the position of the American people, with only a 3.1% margin of error in a scientific poll that I'm happy is now as part of the record here in the United States Congress. And I'd say here's another way to analyze this poll. I'm looking at this one that says there are 13% undecided, Mr. Speaker. So you have 69% who agree altogether, and you've got 18% that disagree altogether, and 13% that neither agree nor disagree. Now, I always wonder, when we're doing polling, why do we measure those without an opinion? If they don't agree or disagree, that's about the definition of ambivalent. We call that mocksnicks where I come from. And so I take that out of there and calculate it the other way and put together, and you add together 69% and 18%, and then you say what percentage are those that agree? Well, it's actually 79.3% say we should not abort a baby whose heart is beating, and 20.7% say, well, it'd be okay if we did. That's another way of measuring this, and that's a 4-to-1 measure. 5.5 to 1, 4 to 1. Americans are ready to protect innocent unborn human life. And Mr. Speaker, think what this means. Think what it means that we are a society that seems to have plugged our ears to the understanding that life begins at conception. I've known this for a long time. It wasn't a mystery to me. I see the beautiful little baby going out now, and Mr. Speaker, that's a very gratifying thing to see from down here, that parents raising their children right. But from my standpoint, I have this memory of Marilyn and I were married in 1972, and I remember sitting there in Card Club, and the discussion at that time was, well, they have all these babies that are being born in Central America, and why do they have these babies if they can't feed them? Why don't they just abort them? I remember that discussion around Card Club on a Friday night. And it didn't really trigger me at the time because we hadn't been very far into the abortion debate. I hadn't thought about it very much. We weren't parents, and Marilyn wasn't pregnant at the time. We were just married. And so I remember that discussion, though, and it just didn't hit me. It just kind of went through, and I don't even know if I engaged in it. I just remember that they said, somebody at the table said, well, if they can't feed them, why don't they just have an abortion? Well, not very long after that, our first child was born. And I picked up that little baby, and actually he wasn't little, he was just a little bit short of 9 pounds. But I looked at him, and I was in such awe of the miracle of that little boy, that little baby boy named David. There was an aura about him. He was a product of Marilyn and me, from our love. And there he is, a miraculous little child in my hands, warm and squirmy and soft and beautiful, and a miracle. And it's different if it's somebody else's child, I suppose, because it hadn't hit me like that. But there was an aura about this little baby, and you could have convinced me he was the second coming of Jesus Christ himself. And I looked at him and I thought, how could anyone take this little miracle's life? How could they kill this baby now? He's minutes old. How could they take his life the minute before he's born? No one could do that. Well, almost no one. Could they take his life the minute after he was born? Or then could they take it the minute before he was born? Could someone take his life an hour before he was born, or a day? Or could they take it a week before he was born, or a month, or a trimester, or 2 trimesters, or 8 months, or 36 weeks, or 37 weeks before he was born? What changed? What changed throughout that time? From the moment, and in a matter of minutes, it all fell into place for me. From the moment of conception, he was formed in his mother's womb. And from that point on, he's growing on the genetic configuration that he is, blessed with the soul placed in him at that moment. And that little boy grew from that point on, and now he's the father of 3 of my grandchildren. And they're all miracles to me. And our other sons are all miracles to me. And our other grandchildren are all miracles to me. But I can't conceive of doing anything except sacrificing, if I needed to, my life to protect them, because they are unique human beings worthy of all of the protection that society can give them, just like every American is, and in fact everybody on this planet is, seen in God's eyes. And there has to be a moment that our lives begin. We have to choose that, because we can't have an immoral position coming out of law that says, well, it's up to the mother to decide whether this baby is going to have an opportunity to fill its lungs full of free air and scream for its own mercy. They can't do that from the moment of conception, but they can do that from the moment of birth. And if we could hear that inner womb scream at that moment of abortion, we would plug our ears in terror and fright at the crime that abortion is. And so it's our moral obligation to protect all human life from the moment of conception until natural death. That's what this bill does, H.R. 490, the Heartbeat Protection Act of 2017. The polling that we have here says clearly that the American people agree. And it's not only, Mr. Speaker, the American people, well, it is actually in the polling, but it separated them out into categories so we could understand how people think about this and how they think about it from the categories of being Republicans and Democrats and no party or independents. As you can see, among the Republicans, 86% agree that if a heartbeat can be detected, the baby is protected. That's an 86 to 6% disagree, 6% of Republicans. 86% of Republicans. That's about as high a number as you see on anything. You know, I should run a little measure sometime. You should ask, what does the sun come up in the east? That's probably about only a 97% issue. But it's 86% wants to protect a baby with a heartbeat, Republicans. Democrats, still, that landslide majority of 55% of Democrats want to protect a baby from the moment a heartbeat can be detected. 25% say no, 55% say yes. It's more than a 2-to-1 support among Democrats to support the language that is in this bill for H.R. 490, the Heartbeat Protection Act. And then when you go among independents, they're a little more pro-life than Democrats are. Shouldn't be surprised at that. 61% of independents want to protect a baby from the moment that their heartbeat can be detected. This is a huge issue for America. America is not yet informed enough about this legislation that's available. And sometimes we get stuck in a rut and we decide, well, we've been working on the sex-selected legislation or the pain-capable legislation, or we've been trying to get Planned Parenthood defunded, which this Congress must do, and we need to do it perpetually, not just annually. Those are all things that we need to be working on, but it's time now for this Congress to swing for the fences, to move legislation that's based upon a clear and distinct principle, a principle of life. If that heartbeat beat of that little baby's heart, that innocent little baby, can be detected, we have a moral obligation to protect that baby. And then how do we measure the end of life? And how has it been from time immemorial? When the heart stops, when the heart can no longer beat, yes, we measure brain waves, we do other things, but when that heart stops and that heart can't be started, we can't sustain life. We call that death. And when an abortion is committed, that little baby's heart is beating. And you know that the abortion stops a beating heart. That's on posters by the Knights of Columbus and others all over this country. Abortion stops a beating heart. We need to protect the lives of all of those little babies with beating hearts. And we can detect them now with the ultrasound and the science that we have. And it's time. It's time for this Congress to move, especially when we see, In our March for Life here that I mentioned a little earlier, Mr. Speaker, when we have hundreds of thousands of people that come out here and gather down on the mall and then march to the Supreme Court building to plead for the court to protect innocent unborn human life, what's happening is America is waking up. America is feeling the guilt, and we pray for the mothers who have had abortions. But America is also understanding that there is a life that begins at the moment of conception. And so, of all of the families that have first bonded with this little unborn baby by seeing the ultrasound, sometimes by framing it, as exists in my Sioux City office for Joseph Dean Anderson's ultrasound, but millions of those cases across the country are raising the awareness of the American people. And it's not just the mother and the father that see that ultrasound, they see it in real time, and they hear the sound for real. It's not just a picture that goes up on the wall that's framed, but it's a living, breathing, moving organism where you can see that innocent little baby squirming and moving around inside in the amniotic fluid, and you can see the expressions on the face and the movement that is there, that this is a real human being, and you want to get your hands on that little baby and hold him and love him, but you have to wait. You have to wait until they grow enough that you can do that. But family after family has this, and little brothers and sisters are shown that ultrasound, and they say, this is your little brother or your little sister that we expect on such and such a date. We'll be pretty close with that date. And so kids, brothers and sisters, the siblings are recognizing their brother or their sister, acknowledging that they're there as an innocent unborn human being well before they're born. And they grow up knowing this. And now for the 44 years since Roe versus Wade, we have millions and millions of pro-life people, millions and millions of anti-abortion pro-life people who understand this. They grew up understanding it, and no one can any longer tell them it's just a blob of a tissue and that it's not alive. I recall a World War II veteran, and one who I admired and respected, and his name, he's passed away now, as many of them have, but his name was Vic Lunsman, and we were having this discussion while we were talking about building terraces and tiling, and he said, if is this, when the pro-abortion people say that this baby's not alive, if this baby's not alive, why then do you have to kill it? Why do you have to kill it? I thought he put that into a package about as compressed as it could be. We know that abortion ends an innocent life of an innocent human being that's created in the same image that we are created in God's image. And now we know from 16 days on that we can, it's not just that we know that there's a heartbeat, but we can hear it. We can hear the beat, 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 beat of that little heart. And to think of that little heart struggling for life, to think of that baby squirming to try to avoid the abortionist, to think of that baby feeling the pain, to think of that baby being aborted because the mother or the father wanted a boy or a girl, or because somebody told them that that baby wasn't going to be exactly perfect. None of that measures up against innocent, unborn human life, sacred life, that life that we have to protect from the moment of conception until natural death. That's what's wrapped up in this heartbeat bill. And if we had the science to prove the moment of conception, I'd be standing here with a moment of conception bill. But we don't have that science today, but we do have the science of detecting a heartbeat. And we know the sound of a beating heart is the sound of life. And if you can detect a heartbeat, if you can hear that heart beating in any of us, you know that person is alive. You know there's a spirit within us. You know that our soul is still within our body. And you know that there's a hope for us, at least, whoever that might be whose heart we're listening to get up and to move about and to live and love and laugh and learn and reproduce and contribute to glorify this earth in the way that we are challenged to do. Yet 60 million babies have been denied that opportunity, have been denied that gift of life. What might they have done? What might they have done for America? What might they have done for the world? How many presidents? How many Mother Teresas? How many Billy Grahams? How many people have lost their life before they ever had a chance to breathe and fight for it, that might have solved the problems that we're facing today here in this United States Congress. We can't deny that potential. We carry that guilt today, but the best we can do is end it as soon as we can end it. And we'd end 90 to 95% of the abortions in America with H.R. 490, the Heartbeat Protection Act. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind you here in this Congress that this is a bill that has strong support in the polling that we have rolled out here. 86% of Republicans say if a heartbeat can be detected, the baby should be protected. 55% of Democrats agree if a heartbeat can be detected, the baby is protected. 61% of independents say that if a heartbeat can be detected, the baby is protected. And of those who oppose it, at least those who oppose it vigorously, only 6% of Republicans, 25% of Democrats, and I'm going to suspect that a fair amount of these 25% of Democrats, Mr. Speaker, are more for political reasons, and that they wouldn't be able to sustain themselves in a moral debate on the topic. And I think that may or may not be the case for the 27% of no parties. But to put this back into summary, Mr. Speaker, here's the easier numbers to remember. 69% of the American people, with only a 3.1% margin of error, believe that if a heartbeat can be detected, the baby is protected. That is 7 in 10 Americans that take that stand. And that is one of the strongest pieces of support you can get for any bill that would ever come to this floor, or any discussion that we ever have, if you get up to that level of 7 out of 10. And only 18% disagree vigorously.